Hi, I'm Sebastian Stodolak, and this is the next episode of Through Bastiat's Eye. This time I have a pleasure to speak with Mr. Bjørn Lomborg, the president of Danish think tank Copenhagen Consensus Center, and also author of many interesting books and articles on climate change. The latest book published this year is titled False Alarm: How Climate Change Panic Costs Us Trillions, Hurts the Poor, and Fails to Fix the Planet. Hello, Mr. Lomborg.
Hey, Sebastian. Good to talk to you.
I guess that Al Gore wouldn't like the title of your latest book, right?
No, he probably wouldn't, but I think Al Gore is a good politician, and I believe, genuinely wants to do good. And so what I'm trying to do is simply say, look, global warming is a real problem, but the way we worry about it is often misguided, and the way we try to fix it is often incredibly expensive and do almost no good. So I think Al Gore would agree with the intention, although I'm sure he would hate a lot of what I say. Yeah.
Let's talk about priorities, governments and priorities, because governments do a lot of things to help people. At least that's what they say. That's the official excuse to spend our money. So in your opinion, how effective they are in identifying the real problems and finding the right solutions to those problems?
So one of the things that we do at the Copenhagen Consensus Center is bring together lots and lots of economists across the world to look at where can you spend resources and do the most social good. So we basically use social cost benefit analysis across a wide range of areas to say, where can you spend money well? Now, if governments were already doing this incredibly well, you wouldn't need that sort of information. So clearly the answer is governments don't always get it right. I think on the other hand, we got to recognize that certainly governments on a very fundamental scale has gotten some things right. Clearly, one of the important things of a society is that you get clean drinking water, that you get sanitation, that you get basic infrastructure, these kinds of things. And we've actually managed to do that. The question, I think, is much more a marginal one. So it's about saying, all right, look, we're here. We've spent some money, probably badly. We spent some money, probably well. But the reality is, next year, for our next budget, how can we spend additional money and do the most good? And that's the question that we answer.
You worked with government of Bangladesh, right?
Yes.
And trying to put some order into their priorities by implementing this cost-benefit analysis. So Tell me, how effective were you in making Bangladesh government work better?
So one of the things that you don't think about is that most governments buy an enormous amount of stuff, from post-it notes and pens to roads. And this, especially in third world countries, is often incredibly corrupt. And so what we could show was that Bangladesh could actually spend their resources by making a public or digital tender, and that would be much less open to corruption. Now, it'll probably still be somewhat corrupt, but much less so. And we could actually do that. We did that for about 4% of Bangladesh spending. And we showed that Bangladesh could save about $750 million every year. Remember, Bangladesh is a pretty poor country. That's an amazing opportunity. Of course, the finance minister said, yeah, we're going to do that. And they've actually implemented that.
Okay, but Bangladesh is, as you said, a third world country, far, far away from Europe. We have our modern governments that have been doing cost-benefit analysis since decades. So they probably are excellent at those things. What do you think?
Well, I think that was a slightly leading question. In the US, they've done a lot of cost-benefit analysis. There is very little cost-benefit studies done elsewhere. And very often, cost-benefit analysis is done after politicians have made the decision, we want to do that. And then they basically say to economists, I'm sorry, could you make sure that you make a study that showed that this is a good idea? But of course, that's the backward way of having this conversation. You need to have the cost-benefit analysis done first, and you need to do it across a wide range of areas. We don't typically have good conversations about what what pays off and what doesn't. Again, remember, cost benefit is not the only thing that matters. Obviously not. Economics is not the only thing. Think of it as, if you go into a restaurant, we're basically telling you what's the prices on the menu. And we also tell you the nutritional content and how big the pizza is and all that stuff. But we're the kind of guys who would say, oh, look, spinach is really cheap and it's really good for you, but maybe you don't like spinach. So this is not about saying you have to pick the cheapest and the most nutritious thing, but at least now you know, and you're more likely to pick from the cheaper things that are more healthy for you. So it's more sort of a nudging towards being smarter. We don't do that at all in most European countries.
Do you think that if Western governments have had different priorities back in the day, according to this cost-benefit analysis, rather than to intuition, the situation would be different now, less severe?
Oh, it's very hard to tell. I think there's two answers to this. Obviously, I would love to just be able to tell you, yeah, we'd have been we'd been much better off. Cost benefit obviously would have made us focus more on where you can really get a big bang for your buck. One of the things is to have infectious disease monitoring, and also to have a better framework for developing vaccines. So Bill Gates and many others have been pushing this. You could also argue that the World Health Organization sort of wandered off because they felt like, hey, we've kind of fixed most problems. So they wandered off. They started talking a lot about global warming. On the other hand, and I've got to be honest here, cost-benefit analysis typically looks at stuff we already know. So we know about tuberculosis because it's been around for hundreds of years. We know it's a great investment. We know that for many people in the rich world, you should give them statins to lower their blood pressure. It's one of the big ways that people die, and you can avoid people dying. There's some very simple things that we already know. Corona would have been a much more sort of could happen, but we don't know. I mean, we knew from 1918 that there is the likelihood that eventually there'll be a big pandemic. But would we have made sufficient impact on telling governments you have to be much better prepared for this? I think maybe a little bit, but I don't think that, we can't fix all things. I don't think anyone could really have made us much better prepared. I think we've been a bit better prepared, but this is one of those black swans that are just going to, knock you off course.
Well, I guess that the author of this notion of black swan wouldn't agree, because he calls it a white swan, saying that, well, pandemic was 100% predictable because scientists were talking about it all the time since 2 or 3 decades.
And look, that's true in that very technical sense, that we knew that this was going to happen in the next 100 years, just like we knew there's a tsunami was going to happen. And just like we know that a meteor is going to hit the world. But it doesn't mean that if you know over the next 100 years this is going to happen, that you're willing to spend a lot of resources now on making it happen. I would perfectly agree with Taleb that we should have spent more money, and obviously, looking in hindsight, clearly we should have done that. But it would have been a very, very hard argument to make at the time, because it could also be 50 or 100 years.
And then we have global warming, which is also not an imminent threat. I mean, yes, it's happening right now, but those drastic consequences of global warming are still about to happen in the future. So there's some kind of analogy here. But global warming, in contrast to pandemic, was judged by at least European Union and governments of European Union members as one of the greatest existential threats to humanity. And this is something you disagree with, right?
Yes. So
Why?
very ironically, when the World Economic Forum was gathering in late January this year, I mean, it feels like 100 years ago, they voted all of their top challenges for the world were about global warming. And then, of course, a month later, everybody else thought it was something else. And it shows the difference between, being sort of in the jet set of what it is that everybody in the very, very rich elite worries about and what most other people worry about. So again, global warming is a real problem. The UN climate panel and the vast number of climate economists who have looked at this tell us this is a real issue, but we also need to get a sense of proportion. So the UN estimate that by the 2070s, the net impact of global warming, the net negative impact of global warming will be equivalent to losing somewhere between 0.2 and 2% of our annual income. That's not nothing, but remember, by 2075, we'll be 262% richer than we are today, according to the UN. So instead of being 262%, it'll feel like we're only 254% richer. That's a problem.
Talking about the scenario with business as usual, or
yes, I'm talking about this the scenario. If we did nothing to climate change by 2075, it would feel a little less much better. That's certainly not what we typically hear. We hear, oh, you know, there's endless amounts of hurricanes and droughts and storms and, you know, disaster coming our way. And that's just not what the science is telling us. It's telling us it's a problem, not it's the end of the world. And that matters, because if it was the end of the world, then clearly you should throw everything in the kitchen sink at this. You should literally spend all of your resources on this problem. But if it's not a meteor hurtling towards the Earth, but it's more sort of a diabetes, a potentially serious illness that you certainly need to pay attention to, but one that you can also manage reasonably well with, clearly you should pick very different policies, and especially you should pick much, much less costly policies. Remember, many countries are now considering going carbon neutral by 2050. The estimate is this will cost probably 16% of GDP by 2050. So every year it's going to make us 16% poorer. Spending 16% of GDP to avoid a couple percent of damage from global warming is a very bad deal. That's why I'm saying we should need to be smarter. Yep.
You are talking about Green New Deal, right? So the advocates of this program are saying that you don't have to only look at costs. You need to look at the benefits of this green transformation, because there are a lot of health benefits, environmental benefits, right? And also economic benefits, because when you invest, when you pay for new power plant, new green power plant, you need to hire people there and so on. So you say that this investment is not worth it?
So you're absolutely right. You definitely need to look at all the benefits and all the costs. So there's clearly climate benefits. You'll cut carbon emissions, so you'll have lower emissions and hence lower temperature rises. That's included. That was what I was talking about. You also have health benefits, yes. And that is important to incorporate. Many places, coal-fired power plants pollute a lot, and so that should be included. And it also is in many of these additional arguments. I was mainly making sort of the headline argument here. The third point, the one about jobs, is mostly wrong. Remember, saying that you spend a lot of money and get a lot of jobs, if what you care about is jobs, just take solar versus gas in the U.S. So it's estimated with the U.S. Energy Information Agency's numbers. For every one person employed on gas, for the same amount of energy, you employ 39 people in solar in the US. So that's why people will say, so, if we invest in solar, we get a lot more people employed. No,
that's less productive.
They're just less productive. That's the same way of saying we shouldn't have any, we shouldn't have any big digging machines. We should all send out people with teaspoons. No, of course you don't want to do that. That's 38 people who can't be teachers and doctors and nurses and all the other things that we need in society. So the reality here is to recognize that if you invest in stuff, so if you invest a lot of money to basically get what you already have, you're not better off. You're just as well off, but you are just paying a lot more. That's, of course, what the Green New Deal is. You're paying a lot more for the same stuff.
So what do you propose instead of politics, just as Green New Deal, something else? What would you suggest?
So we actually did a Copenhagen Consensus just on climate, together with 27 of the world's top climate economists, 3 Nobel laureates, looking at where can you spend an extra dollar or euro or zloty on, sorry, you are in euro now, right?
No, still zloty.
You're not. Zloty, okay, good. So where can you invest an extra zloty and do the most good just for climate? And what they found was, do not do sort of Green New Deals because they pay back fairly badly, but invest a lot more in research and development. Remember, the fundamental problem right now is that green energy is more expensive than fossil fuels, which is why, rich countries in Western Europe will spend a lot of money, cut a little of their CO2, feel very virtuous. But we'll not get China, we'll not get India, we'll not get countries in Africa or Latin America to do this. But if we could innovate the price of green energy down below fossil fuels, let me just give you one example. Geothermal energy, for instance, right now covers almost nothing of the world's energy supply because it's only very few places in Iceland, for instance, where you can utilize the heat of the earth to make energy. But there's good arguments that with new drilling technology, you could make this much more accessible almost everywhere. That could mean if we could innovate this, we could actually get cheap energy that would be green and that would actually be cheaper and give us baseload power, just like we have from coal-fired power, just cheaper. Imagine if we could do that. Everyone would switch, not just rich, well-meaning countries, but everyone, China, India, and everybody else. So the idea is, if we innovate, we can get everyone to change. If we try to emulate what Germany does with their Energiewende, we basically just show people, hey, you can waste a lot of money and achieve almost nothing. Obviously, it's the first you should do, not the second.
Well, but in order to accept this kind of thinking as you present, one needs first to accept that global warming isn't an existential threat because innovation cannot be planned. So yes, you can invest a lot of money into new technologies, new energy technologies, but you cannot say that you have a positive outcome just for sure, just in time. And if you treat global warming as an existential threat, you will say, yeah, innovation is good, but it cannot be our only hope. We need to do something more, something else.
Yes.
So that's probably quite crucial for political debates.
Yes, I think there's two answers to that. First, what I'm arguing when I say this is not the end of the world is not something that I've come up with. This is what the UN climate panel is telling us. When you think it's the end of the world, it's typically because you listen to journalists or campaigners who have very strong interest in making you believe this is the end of the world. The second part is, you're absolutely right. If you really think this is the end of the world, you want to do something more. But what blows my mind is when you talk to most people, and Al Gore included, they're actually saying it's the end of the world, so let's do the policies that haven't worked for the last 30 years. That seems to me to be the most crazy argument of all. Clearly, if you really, really worry about global warming, think it's the existential threat of the century, there is a very simple technology. It's called nuclear power. The reason why I'm not advocating it is because right now, nuclear power, new-built nuclear power of third generation is typically much more expensive. We know that from Finland and a few other places around the world. It's just really, really hard to get them to be cheap. Bill Gates and many others are working on making fourth generation nuclear much cheaper, and that could very well be the solution. But if you're really worried about global warming, it makes no sense to say, let's do just like Germany has, spend, literally hundreds of billions of euros and achieve almost no carbon cuts. What you should be saying is, let's then go entirely carbon neutral by switching to nuclear power. So unless you really believe your rhetoric that this is the end of the world, I think the answer is, well, everybody sort of recognize, yeah, it's a problem. We should fix it over the next 30 years. And that's why I'm saying, all right, let's fix it smartly in a way that'll bring along China, India, and Africa, rather than in a way like the last 30 years that'll do almost nothing, that'll cost a lot, and that will actually also leave the problem unsolved. What we need, of course, is a way to have a market mechanism and a market that works for people. And yes, that requires us sometimes to regulate markets, and that's fine. But we should recognize the reason why your kids don't die like flies, the reason why you have opportunity, the reason why we have power, the reason why we can sit here and chat on Zoom is exactly because of the market mechanism. So if we steer it well, we can do immense amounts of good with the market. And we should certainly use that to make sure that the future is even better than now.